I want to welcome you to our panel discussion on state and local immigration policy. As you can see, we're missing 2 members, and we hope they will show up at some point, but I decided we should go ahead. As you all know, immigration is probably one of the pivotal issues of our time. We might even say, seeing that this is a Catholic university, that it is a sign of the times, a reflection of the needs, longings, and aspirations of everyday life for many around the world today. That is especially so along the border, with a long history of movements of people back and forth in this land that was once a region, and then became a nation, and then became 2 nations, the United States and Mexico. Immigration has given rise to many voices, often differing in their views, and to heated debate at all levels of society and government. The panel today, if we have our 2 extra guests who come here, the additional guests, will reflect that discussion. Before introducing our guests, I'm going to take advantage of my position as moderator to make a few remarks about immigration. I'm an anthropologist, and because of my training, I learned a long time ago that human populations grow or cease to grow basically because of 2 pairs of facts. One is births and deaths on one hand, and the other is immigration and emigration on the other. People are born and die, and people move in and move out of places. Another fact is that migration, the movement of people from one place to another for extended periods of time, what we may also refer to as human mobility, is a basic survival strategy of all living things, of plants, of animals, and of course of human beings. Human beings move essentially for 2 reasons. We can't survive where we are. People fleeing the wars in Central America, the exodus of the Irish during the potato famine in the 19th century, and the thousands who fled New Orleans after Katrina and during. We may also be better off somewhere else, which explains the flight of so many from the Rust Belt in the United States in the last 20 years, and the attraction of the Bracero program between Mexico and the United States from 1942 to 1964. The movement of people lies at the center of human existence. It is part of who we are as human beings, and it is part of our shared humanity. That reality, of course, is especially true and pertinent to us here at the United States border, which is, with the exception of Native Americans, a country of immigrants. Immigration in the United States, however, has a complicated and rough past. Our history includes, in its national iconography, the well-known inscription on the Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, send these the homeless, the tempest-tossed," as well as legislated quota systems designed to limit, if not exclude, the entry of people based on national, ethnic, and racial origin. We are a country of nativist movements, of anti-foreign flare-ups, and at the same time, we are an enormously rich, diverse, and striving nation of peoples from every corner of the globe. So immigration is part of our story, and our story of nation building is in large measure a story of immigration. Obviously, immigration is not only a matter of entries and exits. It has become a question of who can come in and who cannot, of who can stay and who must leave. And that's where the rub lies, because it's also a question of who belongs. And we dig deeper, who is and can be American. If we dig further, what does it mean to be American? National identity is complex. It is more than citizenship, a passport, standard bearers of modern nation states. National identity also has to do with language and food and clothing and music. It has to do with politics and religion, and with intangibles such as values and customs and traditions and habits. And it has to do as well with questions of ethnicity and race. As an anthropologist with a little historical insight, the questions of what is American or who is American aren't settled. And as long as you are living and breathing, we will continue to ask those questions. The panel discussion today is a part of that process. With that, I'd like to turn to our guests, and I'd like to stop here for a second because I think that one of our guests has arrived. I would first like to introduce Dr. Alberto Pulido, Professor and Chair of the Department of Ethnic Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of San Diego. His scholarly interests include the intersection of race and religion in relation to issues of social justice and as strategies for transforming communities. He has also written on the history of ethnic studies in higher education and issues of violence and deportation of immigrants. Dr. Pulido was mentored by the first Mexican-American sociologist in the nation, Julian Zamora, who had a distinguished career at the University of Notre Dame. Dr. Pulido?
My name is Alberto Pulido. As was mentioned, I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to follow for my talk. And so I will be succinct as much as I can. There's a lot of information to share, but knowing that there is a time limit, I want to be brief, and then we could pick up the discussion after everyone presents. The name of my presentation is Immigration Policy for the Living, and I have a very specific reason for entitling that, and I think it'll become apparent as I make my presentation. With regards to my outline, I briefly want to mention this notion of immigration for living. Then I want to speak a little bit to framing the narrative. This is a panel on immigration, and I want to challenge that a little bit and get us to think a little bit about this region beyond it just simply being an immigrant world or an immigrant part of the world. Next, I want to speak to issues of historical continuity and notions of community in this region. I want to speak specifically to the demographic growth, specifically with regards to the Latino-Hispanic community. Speak a little bit about the recall of State Senator Pierce. We were asked to look at that issue. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Then I want to speak in relationship to the recall of Pierce, the significance of the ballot box, the significance of voting in relation to the changing demographics and how we can then exercise the story of democracy at the state, the county, and local levels. I'm not addressing the federal issue because we're being asked to speak to issues locally here in San Diego and for the state of California. Immigration for the living. What I mean by that is, as a member of this panel, I wish to highlight immigration policy for the living. It assumes that one migrates, one moves. The whole notion of movement, human movement, is for life. Emigrar para vivir, if I could translate that into Spanish. This is to say that the majority of humanity, and this was echoed right now by my colleague, regardless of points of departure or destination, at some point in one life, one will move in order to reproduce themselves, or more drastically, will have to move in order to survive. And so when I speak about immigration policy, regardless of what the issue is, I would like to underscore this issue as to the issue of movement, and that when we're talking about creating immigration reform, that we keep this deeply in mind in the work that we do, regardless of what part of the world we're in, or regardless of where we are, if it's here on the US-Mexico border, or if it's another part of the world. How do I frame this narrative? One of the biggest challenges I see with a panel on immigration policy regarding this region is that it frames and assumes that a Latino presence, which is what I wish to speak of today, is slowly based on northward immigration from southern nations of the Americas, from Mexico, Central, and Latin America. It assumes that these communities are comprised of outsiders, that simply everyone came from somewhere else. And I'm here to tell you that this is not the case. I'm a living example of that. I grew up here along the border. I went to Mar Vista High School. I went to Southwestern College. I grew up right on the frontera. I remember daily crossing the border with my parents. I remember going to get medical service in Tijuana. I have many friends from Calexico. I have many friends from El Paso. It's a reality. It's a community. It's not people from somewhere else. This is the border community. And I grew up that. That's why I'm bilingual. That's why I have family in Mexico. That's why I spend time in Tijuana like I do in San Diego. It's part of the world. That's changed, of course, after 9/11, but we really need to emphasize that reality. A lot of us have been here for over 40 years, and we came here because of work, and that was the reason we came to the region. Just like so many people from Mexico who've come to Tijuana, or people who've come from other parts of the country. I then spent 20 years migrating all over the United States in terms of work as a professor, so that reality to me is very real, and I think it's really important to emphasize that. This region of the world is not just a sending or receiving community, but a place where people have actually established residence for hundreds of years and have built their entire lives here in the region. Focus should be on las vidas cotidianas, okay? Vidas de todos los días, everyday living, in which immigration or migration is simply but one part of one's life. It's not the only thing. We have to address issues of family. We have to address issues of religion. We have to address issues of politics, of community, and they're all integral to this reality. Okay, we can speak about that for hours, and I just think it's really important that we not lose sight of that in a conversation with regards to the border, because it's very important to look at that. And those are some of the struggles that we're dealing with today. Social context of immigration is required. An immigration-focused discussion on this region strips it of any historical, economic, social, or political context. It denies that human contact between distinct cultures and traditions in this region, first in central Mexico, going back to the 16th century, and the present-day American Southwest, that according to the French biologist Jacques Rouffy, has no world comparison other than to the birth of Europe over 35,000 years ago when the invading Cro-Magnons and their contact with the Neanderthals. So I think this is a very special part of the world and a very important part of the world, and again, wanting to emphasize the importance of that. This historic human contact has left this part of the world with a deep imprint in the people of the region and their way of life. We can talk about it as mestizaje. It's been talked about by some scholars as the first mestizaje occurring when you have European contact with indigenous contact in Mexico. And in this region of the world, we can talk about it as a second mestizaje, maybe not at a biological level, but at a cultural level. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind. So what I wish us to think about is new perspectives on border communities and states, long, deep, and historical continuity, implications for families, for commerce, for medical services, for culture, for language, for religious expression, for shared values and vision of community. We express this today in our world as transnational realities between nations. We call it in the scholarly world as borderlands. Gloria Anzaldúa probably has written the most in this area, and it's been picked up by many scholars. To live in a border reality, to live in this multiple reality of sharing borders. One of the best examples I can think about is right here at this campus. We at the University of San Diego offer medical services in Mexico. Okay, an organization by the name of Sistemas Médicos Nacionales, Sociedad Anómica by the name of SIMSA. Okay, I love their model, bridging borders, protecting families. So we actually, I as a member of this university, I can get a medical service in Mexico. And it's that same understanding of that correlation between communities. I think that's an excellent example of that. So let me move on then. Having set that foundation, what does this history have to do with demographics, and what are the implications for immigration policy? I want to highlight just these 5 points and just get to my conclusion. I want to first speak to Arizona State District 18. Then I want to speak briefly about the nation, more specifically about the state of California, move on to the county of San Diego, move on to the city of San Diego, and then speak to conclude in terms of what all this means. With the recall election of Russell Pierce, which is the first recall election of a Senate president in the history of the United States, District 18 of Arizona, Mesa, Arizona, you have 100,000 people who live in the district, of which 43% are Latino. Okay, there was 10,000 recall signatures, various political and religious affiliations that were brought forward. There's 70,000 registered voters in that district, of which 13,000 are Hispanic or Latino. There were 70% of the people who voted in this election voted early, okay? Mail ballots. 6,000 voted on the day of the election. In both of those elections, Pierce lost, okay? Lewis was the one who won. 4,000 Latinos requested early ballots, and over 2,000 voted by mail. The data is still not concluded, but this is an important snapshot I think that we need to look at. And this is the trend that I want us to think about in terms of the relationship between demography, the relationship between voting, and what the implications are. So what we get then is we get two opposing perspectives, and As someone in ethnic studies, that's at the core of the work we do, what we call counter-narratives, master narratives, two competing points of views, two competing perspectives, probably what we'll hear today in this panel. And I frame it with regards to issues of democracy. How do we frame democracy at the ballot box? Taking directly from the concession speech of Senator Pierce, he spoke to the fact that he was about loyalty to republic, that he was about rule of law, and he was about moral principles. The opposing side, from the folks who are organizing voters, building of community, support of family, support of education. In my own field, in my own department, I'm very proud to say that we focus on issues of social justice. We focus on issues of the common good and human dignity. And again, underscoring the title of my presentation, Policies for the Living, policies of affirming community and of affirming families and of affirming what they represent. Let's move on now to the national data. This is incomplete, but it's a snapshot nonetheless in the limited time that I have. There's 312 million people in the United States. 16%, 48.4 million of them are Latino, Hispanic. Okay, Latinos are the fastest growing group in the nation. They're the majority in the state of California who are under the age of 18. The majority of the youth in California are now Latino. Okay, the majority of the growth is based on births in the U.S. It's no longer immigration, as stated in a new Pew report. 7.2 million people are born in the United States, not are immigrants, in the most recent trends from the 2000 to the 2010 elections. The 2050 projection places Latinos at 132.8 million people, or 30% of the U.S. population. As we look at California, there are, if you see at the bottom of the slide, there's close to 18 million people in the state of California who are eligible to vote, who are actually, eligible to vote in the state. We have, according to NALEO, the National Association of Latino appointed officials, Latino elected officials, the projected vote for 2010 is there'll be close to 4 million projected Latino voters, okay? 32% increase from 2008, from the Obama election, okay? In the state of California, they will hold 26.3% projected share of the Latino vote. This is data from the county of San Diego, according to the Register of Voters. For the first time, the Register of Voters has begun to collect data on what they call minority language voters. In between the months of July and November of this year, for the first time they've done this, and they'll be doing this monthly, there are 24,577 new voters in the county of San Diego. Of those 24,577, 8,553 are minority language voters, okay? What we have right now in the county is the language of Filipino, Vietnamese, and Spanish. They've now added Chinese, and that will be a new language group within this community, within the Register of Voters. The data there, you see it. Filipinos represent 11% of that minority language voters. Vietnamese represent 4%. Latinos represent 85% of the new people who have registered to vote, okay? So those numbers are increasing, and again, with the young population, we can see that number growing. We just went through a redistricting experience here in the city of San Diego. I was involved in that fairly intimately. Redistricting happens every 10 years when you have an increase in the census, so it's a matter of having to redistrict our city, to divide it, redivide it, and follow the census numbers. It's a heavily political conversation, it's heavily debated, and the final map for the city of San Diego has been adopted, and it's now online. I want to share that with you briefly. Let me share with you that there's now a new 9th district, okay? We had 8 districts in the city of San Diego. As a result of that population growth, we now have a 9th district. That 9th district is predominantly Latino. It's what you would refer to as a Latino empowerment district. We have one which is District 8, which represents Logan and southern San Diego, and now there will be a new 9th district, okay? Why is the redistricting conversation so important? It's happened, first of all, it's been done by committee. It hasn't been done by politicians. Okay, for the first time in the history of California, California had a redistricting committee, again, that was nonpartisan, that was put forward. And so the city has done one before, but for the state, we have the first one. And you can see that data. I don't have time to go into that, but that's also available online if you're interested. Here's what's critical about redistricting and what it represents for my presentation. The Redistricting Commission guidelines avoids diluting the voting strength of protected classes as set forth in the Federal Voting Rights of 1965. What that means is it's that old historic adage of living in this country, one person, one vote. We fought that in this country. We adopted the 14th Amendment in an attempt that my vote counts as much as your vote and her vote, no matter where you live. If you live in La Jolla, or if you live in Barrio Logan, or if you live in San Isidro, my vote is as equal as your vote. And that's very important to underscore. Provides fair and effective representation for all citizens of the city, including racial, ethnic, and language minorities, and be in conformance with the requirements of the U.S. Constitution and federal statutes. So these are two, to me, very important dimensions of what redistricting represents and what it means in terms of the changing demographics and in terms of the power of the ballot box. This may be difficult to see, but I simply want to underscore the data in the second table here. What the data shows us is that in District 4, you now have 41.5% Hispanic or Latinos, okay? I'll show you what District 4 looks like in a second. District 8, which is the historic Latino district in the city of San Diego, it is at 75%, okay? District 9, the new district, is now 50.3%, okay? So if you want to see what that looks like, there you see District 8, of course, goes through Barrio Logan and down into the Otay Mesa Nesta area. That is a 75% Latino presence. District 5 is in the City Heights area. I'm sorry, District 9 is in the City Heights College area. There you see it kind of in the orange. That is at 50%. And then what has predominantly been a historically African-American community, which is Southeast San Diego, it has a Latino presence of 41%. Okay, that's not to mention all the other numbers in terms of folks. So just to bring this issue to our attention with regards to questions of the future of this country, the future of the city, with regards to race relations, with regards to relations between immigrants is my main point here that I'm trying to underscore. So in closing, for me, the future of immigration policy will occur at the polls. It'll be in the ballot box, okay? The changing demographics I'm predicting will have a direct impact on the contestations over the story of democracy. Okay, how do we want to frame this democracy? How do we want to address issues of immigration? How do we want to address issues of race relations, et cetera, which is what we're interested in discussing here. One story is the story of statutes and propositions that affirm and build community around social justice. I'm clearly very biased in that. That's clearly my perspective. I'm sure there's more we could add to that, but that's where I'm coming from. Versus the story of statutes and propositions that discriminate, that differentiate between the we and the they, between the desirable versus the undesirable. I think it's really our choice. What we can see, though, definitely, is the data is clear in terms of the growing demographics. In many ways, one can argue that the response to the immigration question in a response of fear and a response of wanting to shut these types of things down is because of the growing demographics, and I'm sure that would be argued very directly. So finally, in conclusion, one of my mentors and heroes is Ernesto Galarza, who was an organizer during the 1950s in this country, and I learned from my mentor Julian Zamora two very important things: never seek power and organize. And I think that's what needs to happen here in terms of addressing this question. Organize and begin to address these kind of questions and work with them, register to vote, and then go out and vote. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pulido. I'd also like to mention that in the spirit of Dr. Pulido's talk, we have a voter registration table outside. So it's important to register to vote. Our next speaker is Dr. Pete Nunez. He is a former United States Attorney, Southern District of California, 1982 to 1988. A former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Enforcement, 1990 to 1993, and is now both a lecturer in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of San Diego, and chairman of the Board of Directors at the Center for Immigration Studies.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. I'm going to start my presentation, which is basically going to focus on, I suppose, what we would call the rule of law, but preface that with some more demographics, but on a slightly larger scale. Sometime earlier this semester, the world population exceeded or reached the 7 billion mark. It took less than, I think, 13 years to go from 6 billion to 7 billion. It's projected that world population growth will continue to add 1 billion people around every 10 to 15 years. Most of the growth in population occurs in the third world. So we have somewhere in excess of 4 billion people living in poverty around the world, all of whom would love to be here, or Europe, or in any other developed country. Every country in the world has an immigration policy to determine who gets to come to their country and how many. The United States has had an immigration policy, I suppose you could say, since 1882. This is the current policy, immigration law, I guess I should say, not policy. Which is quite elaborate, handles almost every conceivable issue you could think about in terms of immigration policy. It determines legal immigration, and I suppose by definition, those that are not included in the categories of people who can legally immigrate. If they come to the United States, they come illegally. So the Congress has, again, included many criminal penalties to deal with various criminal violations of the immigration law. I think given the fact that there are, depending on whose estimate you want to look at, somewhere upward of 11 million people here in the country illegally, obviously our immigration law, or at least the implementation of our immigration law, hasn't worked too well. Now, we had faced this, and it's not for the first time. Beginning in 1965, when the latest major revision was made to the immigration policy in the United States, we've seen legal immigration increase to unprecedented levels. There are more people immigrating legally these days, and for the last almost 20 years than have ever immigrated legally in the history of the country. So we have a very generous legal immigration policy. Some would say excessively generous, especially in times of a recession, but we'll leave that to a different discussion. The point is, we admit about 1 million people legally every year. Up until the recession, the estimates were that there were about 500,000 illegal aliens net increase each year. That number, at least the estimates, have declined since 2008, and there's various ways that these estimates are arrived at. Some are looking at arrests at the border, which are down by over half from the peak years. There seems to be a decline in the amount of money being sent back to Mexico from people that are here legally or illegally. So there's a number of indicators that illegal immigration has decreased, and that, in fact, the illegal population has slightly decreased as well. Leading up to 1981, there was a public outcry in the country about the increases in illegal immigration, which led Jimmy Carter in 1978 to appoint a presidential commission, which was headed by Father Theodore Hesburgh from Notre Dame, Their report was filed in 1981, and it took Congress 5 years to deal with the recommendations included in the Hesberg Commission report. What those recommendations were was we have to stop illegal immigration, pure and simple. And the question was, how do you do that? And the theory then, and I think still is today, that the way you stop illegal immigration is a combination of border enforcement and interior enforcement, and the interior enforcement generally includes, as a large part of it, trying to find a way to keep people from getting jobs who are not eligible to work here in the country. I think it's pretty clear that, while not all, but most of those who come here illegally do come to seek work. And they have been very successful up until recently in being able to find work in spite of some meager efforts to prevent that, and in spite of the fact that the law says they're not supposed to do that. So in 1986, after 5 years of debating the Hesberg Commission report, Congress passed the 1986 Immigration Reform and Control Act, which basically contained 3 provisions. First, it called for increased border enforcement. That never happened. It called for employer sanctions, and they set up this I-9 system, which quickly proved to be ineffective. And it included an amnesty, which ultimately resulted in 2.7 million people being granted amnesty. There are estimates that that after those 2.7 million people received amnesty, for every one of them, 5 additional people were able to immigrate legally under the family reunification provisions of our immigration law, which contributed to this massive increase in legal immigration we've seen since the late 80s through the 90s through today. In spite of, well, because the employer sanctions provisions of the 86 Act did not work, and because there was no effort really made to do anything at the border, at least at that point, illegal immigration continued, and it has resulted in this massive number of people that are here illegally, and so the question is, what do we do about it? This question has been on the minds of, I think, presidents and members of Congress throughout the 90s and throughout the first decade of the 21st century and even today. The only reactions or proposals that you have probably heard about fall under the term of so-called comprehensive immigration reform. President Obama is insistent on comprehensive immigration reform, as was President Bush and as was the McCain-Kennedy Act. Their version of comprehensive immigration reform basically means amnesty and a guest worker program. It doesn't deal with much else. During the Clinton years, Operation Gatekeeper and some other similar enforcement provisions along the border were implemented to try to deal with illegal immigration. It had localized beneficial effects, but it did not affect the overall flow of illegals along the border. After 9/11, there was another enhanced enforcement program put in place. In 1992, there were a little over 4,000 Border Patrolmen in the entire country. On 9/11, there were less than 9,000, and today there are about 22,000, most of the growth since 2006. So there has been an effort by the last 2 administrations to do something better on the border, but we still have not addressed the workplace or a program to try to keep people that are not authorized to work from working. The latest proposal or the latest system that is available is the E-Verify system, but it exists only on a volunteer basis. Given the fact that this illegal alien population has existed now for the better part of 20 years, and the federal government has done little, if anything, about it, that has led some local and state governments to try to deal with the problem at their level. Arizona, I suppose, being the most notorious. But there are over 30 states that have enacted or are in the process of enacting some sort of state-level immigration enforcement program. They're not all the same. Some of them are relatively simple and straightforward. Some of them are quite comprehensive, as was Arizona's, and the Alabama law, I suppose, is the most recent attempt by a state to deal with to deal with immigration at the local level. A little bit of law. I guess I learned this here at the law school at the University of San Diego back in the late 70s, or late 60s rather. Good place to start is always to read the law, read the statutes, and then read the court decisions that have interpreted those laws. Beginning in back in 1875, let me start again. Up until 1875, it was quite common for states to have their own immigration laws. In 1875, the Supreme Court reached a decision which barred state governments from enacting immigration laws that dealt with the admission or who could be admitted. In other words, you can't have your own immigration policy in terms of how many people can come and who can come. And in the so-called Chinese Exclusion Act cases that occurred in the late 1800s, a very important constitutional doctrine called the plenary power doctrine was announced, which basically said that the two political branches of government, the executive and the legislature, have exclusive authority to determine immigration policy, that the court system is not supposed to involve itself in the formulation of immigration policy unless the executive and the legislature defers to them, allows them to do it. The bottom line is that if Congress decided they wanted to have an immigration policy that admitted only left-handed, red-headed Norwegians, you could do that. Probably not, doesn't make much sense, but the point is they can do whatever they want, and it's not subject to restraints by the judicial branch. Moving ahead, who would have guessed this, but in the early 1970s, the state of California actually passed a law making it illegal to hire an illegal alien, making it a crime for an employer to hire an illegal alien. It was probably the first state in the union to pass such a law. It was immediately challenged, went to the United States Supreme Court. The opponents of it claimed that immigration was exclusively a federal issue, that state governments, going back to the 1875 decision, were barred from doing anything relating to immigration, that the so-called preemption doctrine, that when the feds involve themselves in an issue, it preempts the states from participating under the Supremacy Clause. Therefore, the California law was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court in 1976, in the case called Decanis versus Bica, said, no, that's not correct. The states are free to do anything they want regarding immigration policy as long as it's consistent with federal law. So you can't do something inconsistent, but anything you want to do that's consistent with federal law, the states are eligible to do. And the court concluded that since under federal law, illegal aliens were not supposed to work, that clearly California passing a law saying that employers in California should not hire illegal aliens was consistent with that federal law, and therefore they upheld it. Now, as soon as it was upheld, the California government walked away from it and has never enforced that provision. The Decanis doctrine was reaffirmed recently. For those of you that follow these issues, back last June, I think it was, the Supreme Court reached a decision in another case from Arizona in which the state of Arizona, not the infamous 1070 law, but in a separate law, Arizona had passed a law which essentially said the same thing, that employers in California, in Arizona, in order to apply for a business license or to maintain a business license, could not hire illegal aliens, or they must use E-Verify. And that was challenged. It was found invalid at the trial court level. It was found invalid at the Ninth Circuit level, which is not a surprise. But the United States Supreme Court said, hey guys, go back and read DeConis versus Beeker. What Arizona did is consistent with federal law. In fact, in a provision in the federal law that had been passed since then, the Congress had specifically said that states could have their own laws dealing with business licenses regarding E-Verify. So DeConis versus Beeker lives. It will continue to be cited in future cases, and when the Supreme Court gets around to examining the infamous Arizona 1070 and the Alabama laws, DeConis is going to be central to their decision making. Now, it is certainly possible that some parts of the Arizona or Alabama law go over the line and may be struck down, but some parts of it will clearly be upheld. Some parts of both laws will be upheld. And so for state and local governments who deal at a much more immediate level with the impact or the effects of illegal immigration, for them to have some authority to protect themselves or to deal with the issue makes perfect sense. It's constitutional, and it will continue to be part of our legal framework, I suppose, as we go forward. Let's see. The immigration law that Congress has passed, which no one dares question, decides who gets to come and who doesn't get to come. Now, Congress can change that anytime they want. They can change the current system of admissibility. They did that in 1965. They did it in 1924. They did it in 1881. And they could do it again. But the bottom line is somebody gets left out. The United States, no country is going to be in a position to essentially allow unlimited legal immigration given the demographics of the world. So wherever you want to draw the line, wherever you want to draw the line and say, okay, these are the people and this is the number of people we're going to allow to come in. There's going to be others beyond that that are excluded. And there will always be a temptation for those who are excluded to want to come illegally. It is the responsibility of the federal government to stop that, which they have obviously failed at miserably over the last, well, you could say probably forever, but certainly over the last 30 or 40 years. Every area of law enforcement that I was ever involved with involved cooperation between state, local, and federal agencies. There was not a case that there wasn't a category of case that we handled at the U.S. Attorney's Office at the federal level where there weren't San Diego Police, San Diego Sheriffs, California Department of Justice officials that were cooperating and collaborating in the effort to deal with whatever the crime problem was. So whether it's drugs or terrorism or identity theft or bank robberies, state, federal, local law enforcement has always cooperated. The lone exception, which has developed just in the last 20 years, is immigration enforcement. Some state and local law enforcement agencies refuse to cooperate with federal immigration authorities, even though they have the authority under federal law to do so. And you see in some states, Arizona being a good example, where I don't know how many sheriffs there are in Arizona, how many counties, 10 or 12, I suppose, and there's probably 2 or 3 that are leading the pack in terms of wanting to cooperate, with the immigration authorities, and there are 2 or 3 that are leading the pack not to cooperate with law enforcement. There are ample provisions in the current law which encourage, in fact, state and local law enforcement to assist federal law enforcement in dealing with immigration crimes. Now, the law does not contemplate, and I would not advocate, that the state and local law enforcement agents start sweeping the streets looking for people who are here illegally. But there are a number of things that they should be doing that are common sense. When you arrest somebody for a state crime or a local crime and you find out they're illegal, they should be turned over to federal law enforcement, or at least federal law enforcement should be notified. In some places like San Francisco, that's prohibited. So there are various political factors that have been placed as obstacles in the way of what used to be traditional, effective, efficient law enforcement in the area of immigration. I believe my time is up, if not past, so I will defer any further information to the question and answer period. Thank you.
Issues that were left unresolved during this session, of course, will be, or may be answered, or at least addressed during the question and answer period. I would next like to introduce Angela Garcia. She is a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of California, San Diego, and a researcher at the Center for Comparative Immigration Studies, also at UCSD. She holds a master's in Latin American Studies from UC San Diego. Angela conducts research on subnational immigration-oriented policies in the United States and Spain, with a focus on their outcomes in migrant communities.
So the title of what I'm going to talk about today is Return to Sender, a Comparative Analysis of Immigrant Communities and Attrition Through Enforcement Destinations. So I want to start off by giving some background to kind of contextualize my talk, and these points are going to somewhat overlap with what Professor Nunez discussed, in that there is a long history of state and local involvement in immigration and enforcement policy in the United States. But since the late 19th century, there's been a rough division of labor between the federal government and state and local governments. The federal government has been in charge of forming national immigration policy and enforcing civil immigration law, especially the big ticket item of the apprehension and deportation of the unauthorized. State and local governments, on the other hand, can form immigrant policy and enforce some criminal immigration law. So that's kind of the lay of the ground, lay of the land, roughly again, but several things have changed recently in more contemporary times. The first is the 287G program, which was introduced with the 1996 immigration reform. Another new player on the immigration scene is Secure Communities. The program was launched in 2008. I'm not going to get into too much detail into these programs, but I'll just say that they represent the devolution of federal immigration authority, but some of it at least, to states and localities, and the technological extension of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, into state and local jails. Where I really want to focus today is on this third point, state and local policies of immigration. As we've mentioned, Arizona's SB 1070 of 2010 certainly brought this into the forefront in the media, though Arizona is not alone. Between 2005 to 2011, state-level legislative activity on immigration has increased dramatically. This chart only shows state-level policies. If we looked at local-level legislation around the immigration issue, we would certainly see even higher bars. I should say that here on the graph, both measures, it reflects both measures that restrict immigrants and accommodate immigrants. In terms of restrictive legislation, the literature typically discusses this kind of policy in terms of attempts to constrain immigrants' local rights, benefits, and integration, often by conditioning access on immigration status. In terms of accommodating policy, again, the literature discusses these kind of legislative measures in terms of attempts to expand immigrants' local rights, benefits, and integration into the receiving community, irregardless of authorization status. So within those policies that are characterized as restrictive, attrition through enforcement policy is an important trend. And what I mean by attrition through enforcement policy is subnational measures that target undesirable immigrants with the goal of garnering their voluntary exit rather than their forced removal. So this kind of policy is really discussed as a third way that avoids both massive deportation and mass legalization, as we might get through an amnesty program. So facially, attrition through enforcement restrictions are intended to discourage immigrants from coming to or remaining in a particular state or a municipality. So that's kind of a sense of what's changed, but I also want to address why this matters. There's some emerging analyses of this topic, and they coalesce around two questions. The first is really a legal normative debate. Scholars here discuss whether state and local governments should have a role in immigration policy at all. The second debate is more about policy motivations. So here scholars are talking about why subnational jurisdictions enter the immigration or the enforcement policy realm, why some go restrictive, why some go accommodating, and why the majority of subnational jurisdictions don't legislate on immigration at all. What I want to emphasize, though, today is that scholars haven't empirically evaluated the practical effects of attrition through enforcement policies on the ground. Indeed, surprisingly, we don't know whether or not these kinds of policies actually cause attrition. So this is what I'm going to be looking at today. I want to note that there are a couple of studies that try to discuss the outcomes, but they're limited in two important ways. The first is that some rely heavily on anecdotal evidence and secondary media reports that typically report mass attrition after any kind of restrictive policy is passed. Of course, this is problematic because the complexity of human behavior demands far more rigorous methodology and analysis as well as empirical data. There are other scholars who attempt to use the census data to kind of parse out this question of whether or not these policies cause attrition. But the census is limited in the sense that it doesn't categorize unauthorized immigrants as an identifiable category of persons. And of course, the unauthorized population is also subject to undercounting in the census. So I want to suggest that both of those approaches are not great. And by now, you've probably seen that I'm skeptical of claims of mass attrition in restrictive subnational policy environments, and I want to talk a minute about why I feel skeptical about those claims. In taking up this question, I'm drawing from theories of immigrant settlement behavior. On the one hand, I'm going to look at labor market theory. This kind of theory emphasizes the economic processes of settlement. It makes the argument that there's a structural demand for immigrant labor in the developed world, and so if these theorists would address the issues that we're talking about today, I think that they would say, in terms of a prediction, that as long as demand continues to drive immigration, employment will continue to shape settlement and residency. Social network theory, I think, is also important for thinking about this issue. This theory emphasizes the social processes of settlement, and the literature argues that each act of migration makes future border crossing more likely, because the first immigrant pioneers lower the costs and risks for each other migrant that follows in their footsteps. So I think if these theorists were going to address attrition through enforcement policies today, they would probably argue that expanding networks bind migrants to settled life in their destinations, which complicates relocation or attrition. So finally, I'm going to get to my research question, which is how are immigrant actors affected by attrition through enforcement policies? I want to talk about this in terms of settlement and ask the question, do immigrants in restricted destinations settle for shorter periods of time? And also talk about it in terms of residency. Do immigrants leave for friendlier receiving communities as attrition through enforcement measures may be enacted in their destinations? I'm going to talk about this using two different data sets. The first data set looks at potential settlement effects of local level attrition through enforcement policy using the immigrant destinations of Anaheim in Orange County, Inglewood in LA County, and the city of Los Angeles. The second data set looks at the potential residency effects of state-level attrition through enforcement using the immigrant destinations of Oklahoma and California. So these data sets are from the Mexican Migration Field Research Program, which is run out of the Center for Comparative Immigration Studies at UCSD. And with the first data set, again, I'm looking at attrition through enforcement policy at the local level. Using data from a 2009 survey of the immigrant sending community of Tuncas, which is in the state of Yucatan in Mexico. And this is a new sending community of mostly unauthorized immigrants. These are the people that are most vulnerable to attrition through enforcement measures, and they travel to destinations in Southern California, particularly Anaheim, Inglewood, and Los Angeles. Now, these destinations set up a nice comparison for someone like me who's interested in attrition through enforcement policy, because Anaheim has taken a more restrictive stance, Inglewood has taken a neutral stance, has not legislated on immigration at all, and Los Angeles has taken a far more accommodating policy stance. So here I'm going to be comparing the duration of the last migration, which I use as a proxy for settlement in each destination locale, and I'm hypothesizing that there won't be a strong relationship between attrition through enforcement policies and destinations and shorter settlement behavior. So quickly, I want to show you some descriptive statistics for the immigrants in my sample. Here they are grouped by US destination city. And the main take-home point here that I want to show you is that there's not a lot of variation in the demographic or labor market variables across receiving communities. So it's not that a certain group of migrants are going to one place and an entirely different kind of migrant is going to a different destination. I should mention a couple of variables here that may not be immediately clear. The need migration variable, the third one down, measures an answer to a survey question on whether migration is necessary to progress in life. The U.S. debt variable is an interval measure of formal U.S. debt in the United States. So while we don't see big differences in the descriptive statistics, where we do see differences is in the policy stances of the destinations of these migrants within Southern California, starting around 1995. So here again, I'm contrasting the restrictive policy in Anaheim with the accommodating policy in LA. I'm leaving out Inglewood because, as I mentioned, it's taken a neutral stance. This is a selection from city council resolutions, school board measures, and police department policy. And essentially, it's a story of contrasting approaches to immigrants at the local level. Anaheim's measures fall firmly within the realm of attrition through enforcement. But my question again is, okay, do these measures actually cause enforcement? Are they related to enforcement? So I try to answer this question with a standard multivariate regression with a dependent variable of length of settlement that controls throughout for restrictive destination. Restrictive destination is coded on a linear scale with 2 is Anaheim, 1 is Inglewood, and 0 is LA. As expected in each of these 5 models, restrictive policy environment variable is not significantly related to settlement. And it's not related even when we control for standard demographic variables, family in the United States, and economic variables. So the take home here is that migrants in attrition through enforcement locales don't demonstrate shortened settlement behavior in comparison to their counterparts in neutral or accommodating destinations. These models, on the other hand, reflect that settlement behavior is influenced by economic variables and social networks. Migrants with debt and family in the United States stay longer. Those with lower wages also stay longer, as do those with higher levels of education, and the perception of migration as a necessity to progress in life. So now I'm going to move to the second data set, and here we're looking at attrition through enforcement policy, but at the state level, not at the local level. I'm using survey data from 2010 from the immigrant sending community of Tlaquitapa, which is in the state of Jalisco in Mexico. Tlaquitapa is a traditional sending community. It's in its 5th or 6th generation of northward migration. So there is more documented migration here, and these would be folks who would be less vulnerable to attrition through enforcement measures. People from this town travel to the satellite receiving communities in Oklahoma, especially Oklahoma City, and California, particularly the Bay Area. Again, this sets up a nice study for someone who's interested in comparisons, because in Oklahoma, state-level laws have taken a restrictive turn, particularly since 2007, when a big omnibus bill was passed. And California, in the last decade, has passed fairly accommodating state-level policies. So here I'm going to compare residency in each state to see if attrition occurred as Oklahoma enacted its attrition through enforcement policy in 2007. And again, I'm hypothesizing that there won't be a strong relationship between Oklahoma's policy and changes in residence. Again, I want to show you some descriptive statistics. Here, again, they're grouped by U.S. destination state. And as with the previous data set, there's not a lot of variation across these measures. So more or less, the same kinds of people are going to California as they are going to Oklahoma from the sending community. I should note, though, that Oklahoma does have a higher proportion of unauthorized migration from Tlaquitapa, the sending community, and these are the people who would be targeted by the attrition through enforcement policies in the state, as we'll see on the next slide. So again, we see variation not in the descriptive statistics, but in policies of the destination states. And this is a story of very different policy contexts from Oklahoma to California. And I think it's a story of big shifts. So as we all know, California moved from its state level restrictions in the 1990s to an accommodating approach during the last decade. Oklahoma, however, moved in a reverse trajectory. It moved from passing accommodating policies at the beginning of the decade to restrictions towards the end of the decade. I want to focus especially on HB 1804, which was passed in 2007. This was an omnibus bill that did a lot of things. We can talk about them more in detail in the Q&A if you're interested. But suffice it to say that it falls squarely within the subnational attrition through enforcement camp. Indeed, Representative Randy Terrell, who moved the bill forward, said the purpose of HB 1804 is to discourage illegal aliens from either coming to or remaining in the state of Oklahoma. So as HB 1804 went into effect, the media widely reported that immigrants were pouring out of Oklahoma. Several scholars latched onto this and made the same comments. But I want to test this popular perception of attrition empirically to see if immigrants in my sample have actually left Oklahoma. So in the survey that we did in Tlaquitapa, we asked respondents to report where they had lived from the start of 2007 through the end of 2009. Again, HB 1804 was passed, signed in May 2007. So as you can see in the chart, in the years immediately after HB 1804, the population of my immigrant sample in Oklahoma actually grew slightly. Both the documented and the unauthorized populations went up, which is precisely the opposite of what you'd expect to see if you thought that attrition through enforcement was going to work to push immigrants out of Oklahoma. In California, we see that the numbers held constant, so we didn't see large numbers of Tlaquitapenses going from restrictive Oklahoma to more accommodating California. And importantly, we didn't see numbers traveling to other states, perhaps adjacent to Oklahoma, either. So here I'm concluding that attrition through enforcement in Oklahoma ultimately did not change decisions about, migrants' decisions about where to live. So I'm going to wrap up here. Yes, now I'm going to wrap up. This study starts to give some answers to the question about how immigrants are affected by subnational attrition through enforcement measures. Migrants in Anaheim have not settled for shorter periods of time, and those in Oklahoma haven't changed residency. But I don't want to leave you with the notion that attrition through enforcement policy at the subnational level is much to do about nothing. In qualitative interviews that unfortunately I don't have the time to present here, immigrants described the perceptions of Anaheim and Oklahoma as hostile environments in which to live. And so I think that the logical next step in a research agenda like mine is that if immigrants do not leave restrictive local policy locales, as my analysis indicates, then we need to start evaluating the larger implications of migrant incorporation in these destinations. And so with that, I'll end. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Mayor Sam Abed of Escondido. In 2010, he was elected mayor of the city, where he has been a business owner for over 20 years. Prior to that, he was elected to the Escondido City Council in 2004. In 2002, he was chairman of the board of the Escondido Chamber of Commerce and is chairman and present member of the Escondido Chamber of Economic Development and Government Issues Committee. His most recent honors include the East Valley Association Volunteer of the Year Award given to him in 2004, and the Mercado Business Association Leadership Star of Excellence Award presented in 2005.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, thank you to the University of San Diego and the Transborder Institute and my colleagues on the panel to allow us to discuss the local and state immigration policy. Let me share with you my experience as an immigrant and also as a policymaker, and that will give you a unique perspective on the immigration issue. A little bit about my background. I came from Lebanon. As an immigrant here. I am an engineer. I worked for IBM for 12 years, and I came to the U.S. I've been married to my wife for 33 years now. She was born here, but she is from a Lebanese descent as well. I came to this country to realize the American dream. And you know what? We should not forget that this is the best country in the world. What made America great is the immigrants who came here and succeeded in this country. 25 years ago, during my 25 years in the US, I took the oath 3 times to protect the Constitution. The first time as a citizen in 1990, second time as a councilman in 2004, the third time, 2010, as mayor of the second largest city in San Diego, North County. I believe that I do have a moral and legal obligation to protect the right of the citizens of the city and govern under the rule of law. This is something I cannot oversee or overstate. The rule of law is what made America and the democracy in this country the best country in the world. The federal government has, as my colleagues indicated, they have failed to achieve immigration reform. Washington is extremely a partisan, polarizing political climate. The Republican want more competitive wages to make more profits, and the Democrat want more political support. It's as simple as that. It's been a political issue, and that has been leaving the state and local government in a big challenges to address the impact of local immigration. The state has passed Proposition 187 in 1994, and overwhelmingly supported by the voters. 5 million Californians voted on Proposition 187 to establish a state-run citizenship screening system and prohibit illegal aliens from using health care, public education, and other social services in the U.S. and California. So almost 60% of California voters have passed this, although the federal judge in 1994 have put a permanent injunction on this. California is powerless to enact its own legislative laws to regulate immigration and access to public benefits. As Dr. Peter Nunes said, that, you know, the country's immigration policy is needed. Look at Mexico. Mexico has immigration policies. It's very clear. You have to go through the legal system. What's wrong with that? As an IBM engineer, I traveled to 25 countries during my 12 years career with IBM. Every single country required screening, required background checks, required visa, required work permit. Why the US should be any different? So the financial burden, rather than I think now we have an issue in our city. It's a financial burden that we need to deal with, rather than contributing to the economic and social well-being of America. America is built on the hard work of the legal immigrant who contribute to the success of America today. But I think the lack of political will for immigration reform shifted the interest from contributing to American dream to become a financial burden. Immigration is a top priority for Escondido. I have been elected 3 times, and I have run for office 3 times. And in 2010, I ran for mayor. It was a very competitive race, and I did walk 12,000 homes. And for a year. I walked 3 hours a day for 1 year, knocked on doors, talked to the families at their doorstep, and I think that was the best outreach I have done to feel the needs of the citizens. Overwhelmingly, there was a concern in Escondido about the illegal immigration, not the legal immigration. I think everybody in our city embraced the legal immigration. But the overwhelming flood of illegal immigrants to the city have become an issue in Escondido. Last August, I did a poll before the election, and the questions was unsolicited. What would you consider the top priority for you as a citizen in Escondido? Overwhelmingly, immigration was the top single issue for our residents. Until we put this in perspective, we cannot address the immigration in our cities, in our country. We need to understand the other side of the issue. This is a very important issue to our citizens. So, family concerns, yes. I applaud everyone's effort to come to this country and have a better life. My family is benefiting from that. They're getting great education here. And we have realized the American dream. We have made a lot of money. I have secured my kids and my grandkids' financial future. And I'm very proud of that. And I think running for office, my goal now is to help the citizens and the legal immigrant to realize the same American dream that I did myself. Now, I believe illegal immigrants should have human rights. If somebody is sick, we should treat them. If somebody is hungry, we should feed them. Human rights is very important. And I disagree with the extreme views of not protecting the human rights of anybody that comes to the US. But civil rights is a different story. Civil right is a privilege that citizenship should earn and be a part of the political process. I think the discussion should be between legal immigration and illegal immigration, and I think there's a fine line there. Escondido, we have shifted our policy. Remember, back in 2006, we have passed an ordinance as a frustration from the overwhelming amount of illegal immigration in Escondido. We believe Escondido has had 35,000 illegal immigrants out of 140,000 population. Now, this figure, I know it has been challenged several times by many people, but the city of Vista, a neighboring city with similar demographics, have complained about the lack of the Latinos in the political process, which is a valid question. So the federal government has conducted a study. They found out half of the population, the Hispanic population in Vista, are ineligible to vote, and that presumably are illegal immigrants. So prorated those figures on Escondido, 140,000 population. We have half of them are Hispanics, and that means we have about 35,000 illegal immigrants. But since then, because of the economy, because of the stricter laws and regulations in the city, we believe, according to the North Carolina Times story and the US Census, that 12,000 have left Escondido, 9,000 of them believed to be illegals. So we are probably down to 25,000 illegal immigrants in our city. I was voted by, I'm a registered Republican, this is not a secret, but I was voted by 35% of the Democrats and by 25% of the Hispanic votes. So half of them vote, so I got 50% of the Hispanic votes in my city. And that means a lot of legal immigrants have also the same feeling about the illegal immigrations as the citizens. The local effort, we have done a lot of things. We have passed ordinance against the sanctuary city. We have a cross-training with the ICE agent, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement agencies, and our police department is doing an excellent job to focus on the criminal element of the immigration issues. Now, when we did the rental ban, the federal judge said you cannot deal with the illegal immigration. We listened. We shifted our focus from immigration-based policy to standard-driven policy. And since then, with our cooperation with ICE, We only deport illegal immigrants who commit crime. Let me make this very clear. We are not dealing with the immigration status at all. It's a federal government issue. We are dealing and focusing, like the Obama administration. I think he has deported more illegal immigrants, criminal, than any other administration we have seen. So our policy is very clear. We are setting a zero tolerance against crime. Since then, since the last several years, our police, with the cooperation with the ICE agents, we have deported over 600 illegal criminals committing crime. So I think we owe it to not only to our citizens, we owe it to the legal immigrants in the city to create a safer environment. We created a traffic safety checkpoints. The goal is three major goals with the traffic safety checkpoints. Traffic safety, traffic safety, and traffic safety. There is nothing else. Escondido had the second largest hit-and-run accidents in the state, with over 600 hit-and-run accidents every year. This is unacceptable. Mostly, according to several studies, that if you don't have a driver's license, then you're gonna most likely, if you get involved in an accident, you need to run, and you don't want to get involved with it. And that's a state issue as well. Our police chief suggested they should have a driver's license. They should have education about how to drive their cars to be a safer drivers on our streets. Since then, we have decreased the hit and run by 35%. We are below the 400 level. We continue to do that, making our city safer. My brother is I brought him here 20 years ago and sent him to San Diego State University, was proud to pay for his education. He graduated and he went back to Lebanon and he got a job with an American company, Visa International. He was the regional manager for the Middle East. It took him 18 years to get his citizenship. He is one of the top priority because he's a brother of mine. 18 years for somebody who is highly educated, for somebody who has a capital, for somebody who can come to the US and create jobs and contribute to the economy. 18 years. So the system is definitely broken. I think that we need to focus the immigration reform in bringing skillful labor force to America. The way it is right now, in my city in particular, mostly unskillful labor force that we're getting there, and they are using a lot of social services and a lot of financial resources from the city. If you consider the $10 billion cost of illegal immigration to the state, prorated to my city, it's over $10 million a year, the cost of illegal immigration in our city. Here, I want to finish with that. I think we need to come together as a community. Our Hispanic friends are here, and then we need to live together. We can live together under one law. That's the rule of law. They need to understand that they cannot get exemptions, that they cannot be above the law. Everybody should be under the rule of law. We need to come together under the respect and understanding. I have a colleague who's council member Olga Diaz. We differ in a lot of issues. But you know what? We have established a good relationship based on understanding and respect. I think what will bring us together is build relationship, build trust and understanding. And I think in our city action plan, that the city council collective goals, we have created a outreach of diversity and bringing the city together. One more thing. The biggest mistake the immigrants community did 5-6 years ago when they marched in our street holding their own country's flag. I'm proud of my Lebanese descent, but I'm proud to carry the American flag. Loyalty to America is the key for the immigrant community to assimilate with the American culture, be loyal to America, respect this country, and say, I am a proud American, I want to contribute to the American dream, and I want to succeed. Let's learn English. Let's be a part of this culture and continue to make America the greatest country in the world. Thank you.
I would like to introduce our next speaker, final speaker of the morning, William Flores, Mr. William Flores. Until recently, he held the rank of Assistant Sheriff in the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. He has also been Command Officer of the Lemon Grove Sheriff's Station. He has been actively involved in the National Latino Peace Officers Association, where he authored the nationwide policy on non-biased policing. Recently, he served as chairman of the San Diego Regional Hate Crimes Coalition. He holds a BA in Political Science from Indiana University and is a graduate of the Senior Management Institute for Police, sponsored by the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He is currently a member of the Associate Faculty at Miracosta College, where he is an instructor in the Administration of Justice program.
And thank you to the University of San Diego for hosting this and for inviting me. Thank you very much. The rule of law, I'm going to touch on that subject here momentarily. But I was asked to speak on this issue in terms of what is a local government's, or how does a local government's role in immigration, how does it feel in terms of where the rubber meets the road? So what is it like to be a Latino in Escondido? In order to understand what the road is like, I think it's important for us to hear an overview, at least going back to 2005, of where we were and how we got to where we are today. In 2005, the Escondido City Council endorses an initiative that would, in effect, have created a California Border Patrol. This initiative was unlawful on its face. In 2006, by the way, we never voted on that initiative because they never did collect enough signatures to get it on the ballot. In 2006, the Escondido City Council passed the now infamous and unlawful rental ban ordinance. In 2006, the Escondido Police Department also increased their driver's license, their unlawful driver's license checkpoints, where all they would do is stop all cars during this checkpoint and check to see the driver was required to show their license, which is specifically prohibited in the California Vehicle Code. In 2007, there was a proposed resolution regarding illegal immigration. It was submitted by Councilwoman Waldron, and I brought a copy of that. I think it's important that you see and read for yourself the language that was initially introduced in the legislation. I have my wife Connie over there. She's going to be passing out samples. So if you could read that and just go ahead and pass it. I didn't bring enough for everybody, but just pass it throughout the audience. That would be helpful. But let me, for those of you who don't get the copy right away, let me just read to you the first paragraph of this proposed resolution. Whereas illegal immigration leads to higher crime rates, contributes to overcrowded classrooms and failing schools, subjects our hospitals to fiscal hardship and legal residents to substandard quality of care, and destroys our neighborhoods and diminishes our overall quality of life. That was the first sentence in this resolution, which, by the way, passed after some discussion. The City Council decided to delete that first sentence, but the resolution itself passed nonetheless. In 2008, there was a proposed city ordinance which would prohibit day laborers from soliciting for work on the street. There's also a proposed ordinance that would require people to obtain a parking permit from the city. So if they wanted to park their car on the streets, they'd have to first get a parking permit from City Hall. However, in order to get that parking permit, you had to show your driver's license, which, of course, you know, people who are undocumented then could not park their car on the street. So I ask, when I keep on hearing the term rule of law, I kind of have to hold in a chuckle, because rule of law and then unlawful ordinances get passed or proposed or discussed. Kind of conflicting. And besides, we all know, we've all been around long enough and studied these issues long enough to know that a law is not a monolith. Laws change, and we have to change with them. So the rule of law, I mean, today's law, I remember as a young cop stopping people and they had one marijuana seed, and I would put that person in jail for a felony. And that's what it was back then. Now they whip out a prescription. I got it. Laws change. We have to change with them. In 2009, I'm going to hold up something that I received in the mail. This was distributed by the Escondido Police Officers Association, so it's the union for the police. And basically, if you look at it, now I have copies. Again, Connie, my wife Connie is going to pass out copies of this. And if you look at it, in essence, what it says is, in Escondido, this is what crime looks like. It has a brown face. Now, it took me the better part of 2.5 minutes to find this exact photograph on the internet. And what this is a photograph of members of the MS-13 gang, which is in El Salvador. There's no evidence to suggest that any one of these guys ever stepped foot in Escondido. And I'm just talking about the visual images. I'm not even going to discuss, because we don't have enough time, discuss some of the data that's contained in this. But if you open it up and go to page 3 in the handout, you'll see there's a photograph of what is supposed to represent the Escondido Police Department. And they're all very good-looking, white, young men, all handsome and clean. And yeah. Now, I know that this is not something that, I mean, the mayor and the city council will say, you know, that we didn't do that. The union did that. Well, yeah. And the police chief will say, yeah, the union did that. Well, yeah, I got it. Here's the problem, that many of us in Escondido, especially those of us with brown skin, believe that it's because of the environment that's been created since 2005. It creates an environment where cops actually have the feeling that they can do something like this and get away with it. Well, in fact, they have, because up to and including today, neither the police chief or anyone on the city council, with the exception of one, anyone on the city council denounced this flyer. No one has separated themselves or separated the city from the content and the message that this flyer contains. It would be helpful. It would be helpful in terms of repairing some of the damage that has been done with some of these unlawful ordinances that have been proposed and some of the insulting dialogue that we've been subjected to emanating from the city council, at least for the city to say, we do not endorse, nor do we support this type of race baiting, racist statements. In 2010, the city of Escondido attempted to close the Escondido swap meet. Now, the swap meet at that time was owned by a fellow by the name of Joe Crowder. And in speaking with Mr. Crowder, and he knew that eventually he's going to be pushed out of the city. But he conveyed to me that one of his proudest accomplishments in running the swap meet, which, by the way, was attended by, oh, maybe 99% Latinos would go in there. The businesses that which set up their shops there in the swap meet, again, over 90% Latino. And it went away. He says his proudest accomplishment was that because of this swap meet, he helped so many Latino businesses get off the ground by allowing them to come by offering them this forum, which is gone now, by the way. As you know, in 2010, there was a campaign for offices, various offices, including the office of mayor, and it kind of sounds like I'm picking on Sam here, and maybe in a way, but he is not alone in this type of campaigning, but I hold up this campaign flyer, and again, Connie will pass this out too. And basically it says, a list of California's sanctuary cities could be getting longer. There is only one candidate we can trust to uphold the rule of law in Escondido. The issue of Escondido becoming a sanctuary city was never discussed at all, except by a candidate for mayor. But he did it right because he won. This type of allure and playing on the fears of the white voting public in Escondido. I also point out, and he's thanks to Sam, he kind of said it already, but I have a copy that Connie would also pass out. It's out of the San Diego Union, and it's dated in September of 2010. And the article is entitled Hispanics Now Are the Largest Group in Escondido. And in this article, Mr. Abed is quoted as saying that the problem isn't having many Hispanics, it's just that they don't try to assimilate into the community. Quote, they still look back instead of looking forward. Escondido has accepted immigrants from all over the world, and we need to have a diversity in the immigrant community. And you could read the rest. Now here's the thing. Divisiveness, publicly insulting an entire ethnic group, not helpful in terms of relations. Moving on, in 2010, we also experienced the Escondido Police Department's new relationship with ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And again, coming from a law enforcement career, I have had the pleasure of working with many different law enforcement agencies, many of them being federal. And it's true, we have a very good working relationship. It's been my experience there's a very close working relationship between local law enforcement agencies and state law enforcement agencies as well as federal law enforcement agencies. But here's the deal. The typical method of these types of arrangements are written down in what's called a memorandum of understanding so that all the officers know what their role is when they work together. Who has what responsibility? And that role needs to be clearly understood by all the officers that are engaged in whatever they're doing, whether it's narcotics enforcement or whatever. When it comes to immigration enforcement, it's true what Ms. Garcia said, that there's many law enforcement agencies that are reluctant to get involved in immigration enforcement. A good portion of the reason why is because much of immigration law involves civil violations, not criminal, civil. And those few that are engaged in criminal activity, law enforcement has always had the ability to communicate with immigration authorities and have them come around and do whatever they do. In fact, one of my assignments when I was with the Sheriff's Department, I was a commander in charge of all the booking jails. And for those of you who don't understand, when there's 6 jails now in operation here in San Diego County, and 3 of them accept arrests from local law enforcement agencies. And that's where a person enters into the jail system and they get booked. And at that time, and this is going back into the late 90s, when we were one of the first organizations, the San Diego Sheriff's Office was one of the first organizations to establish a computer link between our booking operation and the records section for immigration, which, as I remember, it's somewhere in New England, maybe New Hampshire or Vermont, somewhere up there. But any person who is entered into the jail system and was booked, if they gave a place of birth, when we collect their individual information, if they give a place of birth as anywhere other than the United States, that booking information immediately goes to the, at that time, the INS, naturalization, or Immigration and Naturalization Service. It later changed to enforcement, but that's another conversation. But so all that information went straight to INS, to the records section, who would look up and see, does this person have any type of record with us, record in terms of immigration status with us, and if they don't, chances are they could very well be in the country without documents, and the immigration people would show up and interview that person. But this relationship with ICE, it was a heartbreaker for those of us who were trying to point out these things that should not happen at the local government level, where the rubber meets the road. The reason that they shouldn't happen is because, well, like the mayor said, you know, we want legal immigrants. What he doesn't say is that many families, if not most families, are multi-status families. You can have family members that are undocumented. Some are U.S. citizens. Some are legal residents, all in the same family. Go into any classroom in the Escondido School District. By the way, the elementary school district, which is about 80 to 85% Latino, ask them how many people, or ask them if they know or they have a family member that's in the country that's undocumented. Just about all will raise their hand. Ask them how many people in their family are U.S. citizens. Just about all of them will raise their hand. That's the reality of the situation. So when he's talking about, well, we're going to work with ICE and deport those who were in the country illegally, we're talking about their brothers and sisters and moms and dads and uncles and cousins. It's a very complex issue. It's not as simple as some people would have us believe. And this relationship with ICE, by the way, there's several law enforcement organizations that took a public position against this. One of the major ones, or one of the largest ones, is the Major Cities Police Chiefs Association. Advised against a close working relationship with ICE because of the damage that it causes the relationship between law enforcement and the Latino community. It was evidenced in Escondido only a month or two ago, where a woman who was a victim of domestic violence called the Escondido Police Department, who responded to the call, and eventually, after their investigation, eventually arrested both the woman and her boyfriend who was beating her up. They were both taken to jail, where it turns out she had some immigration issues, and after her stay in the county jail was turned over to immigration, and she had to stay with immigration for a while before her immigration status caught up to the people holding her, and she was eventually released. But news of that, I mean, this happened in the daytime, where in a Latino, predominantly Latino neighborhood, the police show up, they see the woman is battered, they see her get taken away, along with the boyfriend, but they see both get taken away. That story just spread like wildfire throughout the Latino community. There's an expression in the law enforcement community that goes something like this: you can measure the effectiveness of the law enforcement agency by the level of confidence the people have, the people who are being policed have in their law enforcement agency. There is a big problem in the city of Escondido because of these policies. There is clearly an atmosphere of fear in the city, with the destruction of trust and confidence towards their police and government. There's a concept that most police agencies have embraced, arising in the early 90s. It's called community-oriented policing. And in a nutshell, what that means is police agencies will accept input from the people that they are policing. The people will let the police department know how they want to be policed, what is it that they want to have enforced, and what they prefer not to have enforced. I know the mayor brought up the issue of checkpoints. Checkpoints, it turns out, arrived at the desired results that the unlawful rental ban ordinance attempted to do, and that is make the lives of undocumented people so miserable in the city that they'll move out, go somewhere else. And that's what's happened in Escondido, that immigrants, because of so many checkpoints, and there are about 2 a month. Those are DUI, DUI/driver's license checkpoints. They start at 6 p.m. usually and end at midnight. Even though the bars close at 2 a.m. and people are still coming home from work at 6 p.m. I mean, really, is it really about DUI when 1,500 to 2,000 vehicles will go through a checkpoint and they'll impound 20 or 30 and sometimes more vehicles from unlicensed drivers? And I'd like to make a remark about the data that the mayor mentioned about the study that found that unlicensed drivers are disproportionately responsible for more traffic accidents than licensed drivers. Really, I think we all can accept that. But the problem with those studies, and there's 2 of them that I'm familiar with, they both arrived at the same conclusion, neither of which examined a community that has a significant immigrant population. And the reason that that's important is because I don't think that you can apply the findings of those studies in the city of Escondido. And the reason why is because of the number of immigrants who at one time may well have been licensed drivers in the state of California. In fact, there's an article in today's North County Times that shows that most illegal immigrants have been in the country for more than 10 years. And we're talking about close to 66% of those undocumented people have been here for more than 10 years. How many have been here for more than 15 years? Something like 50%? When it was okay for them to be licensed drivers in the state of California, but when it came time for them to renew with the DMV, they're no longer authorized to do that. So now they're unlicensed drivers. The point is that these studies, they defined unlicensed drivers by people who can't pass the driving test, people who did have driver's licenses and for some reason racked up so many points against their driver's license that it was taken away, or they ended up going to court and losing their license as a result of a court order. That's the population that these studies focused on. That's not the population in communities that have large immigrant populations. It's different. In fact, I would suggest, and no study like this has occurred, so some of you scholars that are sitting on the panel, you might want to pass this along. I would submit that there's a very strong possibility that undocumented drivers are even safer drivers than the licensed population. And the reason I say that is because of the risk of loss. They have much more to lose if they get involved in a traffic accident, because they risk losing their entire being in this country. So I submit to you that I wouldn't be surprised if they turn out to be even safer drivers. And the good mayor gave us some data on how much the number of traffic accidents has been reduced as a result of these checkpoints, and that's not exactly true. And the reason I say that is because there is no study anywhere that I'm aware of that shows that traffic checkpoints do anything to promote traffic safety. there's no relationship. There's no cause and effect relationship between DUI checkpoints and traffic safety checkpoints, any kind of checkpoints with regard to traffic accidents. I will say this, though. Let's understand what a hit-and-run accident is. Hit and run is criminal conduct that occurs after a traffic accident. Okay? It's not like someone's going to get in their car and drive drunk. A hit and run is criminal conduct that occurs after a traffic accident. That means there's been a traffic accident, and this guy says, whoa, I gotta go. Now, how many of these hit and runs have, in the city of Escondido, have been committed by undocumented people? Well, the truth is that we don't know. And the reason that we don't know is because they ran. And it's hard to catch hit and run people because they're gone. And we don't have a license number, nothing, very little evidence and follow-up information where we actually can identify. Now, some do get arrested. And let's focus on that. How many of those who are arrested, how many have immigration issues? We don't really know that. So, in terms of a local government becoming involved in immigration and immigration enforcement, a very tricky business. I think most of us who are here might have heard one or two things about the city of Escondido, and depending on your political point of view, might be a good thing, but that's happening in Escondido. Maybe not. What I will say though, and I'll conclude with this, is that it just seems that this immigration issue causes us as Americans to examine our own principles because they seem to be conflicting. Our principles of being a compassionate, welcoming country versus this rule of law thing. How are we going to come together? Thank you.
And with that, I would like to open the floor to a question and answer period. What we have done is set up a microphone here so that if anybody has questions, instead of having our assistants run from one end to the other of the room with a mic in hand, I thought we could have a line here, or people could come up and ask their questions. I would just ask that you keep it short and in respect, of everyone here who has questions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Shirk. I'm actually the director of the Trans-Border Institute, and I wanted to abuse my privilege. There are very few. I wanted to abuse my privilege as director of the Trans-Border Institute to thank everyone for an excellent panel. I was very impressed because I think I learned something from every single person on the panel. I thought it was a very excellent discussion. I want to thank everyone. I especially want to thank Mayor Abed for being here, as well as our other former public servants, Pete Nunez and Professor Flores. This is a really hard conversation to have. It's very complex, as several of you have pointed out, and I think that although there's a lot of feelings behind this issue, everyone maintained, I think, a reasonably, for the most part, respectful tone, and I hope that will continue. I guess my main question, I was approached not too long ago by a family from the Escondido area that had a 17-year-old son that was effectively a DREAM Act kid that was caught in an automobile with other kids, and there was a knife in the car, so there were charges filed against them criminally for possession of a weapon associated with basically a gang-related activity. They weren't gang members, but that was the charge that stuck. And other than that, this kid had no criminal record. He was an upstanding citizen, an honors student, but he was caught up in that DREAM Act dilemma. And I'm just curious, from the other case that we heard about from Professor Flores, what do we do? How can we minimize these otherwise harmless individuals that were catching up in a lot of these efforts to target criminal undocumented immigrants. What procedures could be taken to better address that problem? Because I'm disturbed by the number of people that seem to be caught up who wouldn't properly fit into our category of criminal aliens. So thank you very much.
Do you want me to address that?
Yeah.
I'll be happy to. First, several misstatement or inaccurate statement at best by Mr. Flores. The flyer was sent by the Escondido Police Association. It's a political action committee. It's separate. We have nothing to do with it. The swap meet, it's a landlord issue, and the city has stepped in to address some health and safety issues, violations that affect the 99% of the Latino who visit this place. So the city has an obligation to address the health and safety issues. And Johnston's family, they are the owner of the swap meet. They have been trying to develop the area. So don't blame the city and put it under the racial discussion. This is unfair. The ICE agents, yes, we do have an ICE agents, but the example that Mr. Flores given, it was the county jail that the ICE stepped in and dealt with that issue. It has nothing to do with the Escondido police or the ICE of the Escondido police. I want to make this very clear. And also the state figures of the hit and run are from the state safety agencies and traffic and safety agencies. They are provided, and there is no questions about the correlations between the unsafe drivers, unlicensed, that they have 5 times as much risk to get into an accident than a licensed driver. Back to the deportation issue, just want to make it very clear that here is an article in North County Times about the ICE agents, police detained 406 people. It's all with the criminal background. We will not deal with the immigration status of any citizens. But to say, you know what, we cannot do checkpoints, we cannot make our cities, streets safe because people with the brown skin might be offended. Well, guess what? I am brown. I have a brown skin, guys. I'm an immigrant. But I think there should be, we cannot hide behind the race issue and say, you know what, don't ask, don't tell, come, live, go. You know, this is basically a big diversion from the Mexican immigration law. Here it says the 406 people that have been deported have all criminal illegal immigrants in the city. And illegal immigrants and either had a criminal history, had been deported in the past, or were fugitive wanted by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. 20 people have been detained by federal agents each month since the program began. People who are only in the country illegally are not targeted by the joint effort. Individuals that have been no criminal history and have not been ordered removed from the country have nothing to fear from this program. 53 have been convicted of drug-related crimes, 11 have been convicted of sexual assault, 103 have been convicted of drunken driving, 26 have been convicted of theft, and 11 have been convicted of gang-related crimes. Those are the people on the list of the deportation. Just want to make it very clear. And telling half-truth does not serve the purpose of this dialogue and this discussion.
I'd like to respond to that then, before we go on too much farther. Of those people that were arrested with criminal backgrounds, they include people, for example, that have been arrested, say, for drunk driving 12 years ago, 15 years ago, where now they're married, they're settled down, they have children, and yet because of that drunk driving conviction, they're eligible for this quote-unquote criminal background. I mean, let's tell the full truth here as well. And there's another remark that the mayor said that I think needs to be clarified. The truth is that the Escondido Police Department has no say over who ICE agents arrest. Once they're introduced, once ICE agents are brought into a scene alongside a police officer, they're still ICE agents. They can take anyone they want, including someone without a background. But in the eyes of the populace, the eyes of the Latino community, it's the same. The Escondido Police Department and ICE agents are the same. Technically, there's a difference, but what difference does it make? They still end up losing a family member or multiple family members whenever they're introduced. So in interest of telling, of full disclosure, let's just throw that out as well.
Well, let me add then that as well. In 1996, Congress changed the grounds for deportation to make them tougher. And one of the things they did was to specifically add drunk driving offenses, convictions, to the federal law. So while it may be, some people might not like it, that is the law. And if you want to change the law, well, we changed it to make it tougher. You could change it to make it, to remove that as a grounds for deportation. But the point is, these people are all here, these people that are here illegally, whether they committed a drunk driving or a bank robbery or nothing, they are all subject to deportation, even if they didn't commit any other crimes other than coming into the country illegally. So, look, we have a terrible problem that's been created by the federal government over the last 20 plus years in allowing the situation to get to the point where we have now to deal with the consequences of the federal government's failure, where we have people who are, as Professor Shirk pointed out, 16 years old and were probably brought here when he was 2 or 3 years old, and now what does he do? Those are the hardest category of people to try to figure out what to do with. But at least as long as the law is what it is, we need to deal with it. And if that person is subject to some sort of a suspension of deportation under the law, which is a provision that's available, so be it. But we can't ignore the law. We can't. Well, and you use the marijuana analogy. We changed the law.
Yes.
We did not change the immigration law.
Here's the difference, though. The difference is the Escondido police enforcing immigration law.
They're entitled to.
They're entitled to, but they don't have to. It's a choice,
right.
And that's where the rub is.
And we believe we made the right choice.
That's right. They choose to do that.
Well,
I'm sure the mayor does.
That's up to the people of Escondido to deal with.
Exactly.
I'm looking at the larger picture where we've got a country with a growing American population, 67% of which is due to immigration. A large portion of that population growth fueled by illegal immigration. So these are difficult issues. There's no question about it. But you can't solve it by ignoring it.
And thank you for a spirited discussion on the immigration issue, panelists. My name is Mark Valdez. I'm a volunteer with the Border Angels here in San Diego County. My question is two-pronged. My first question is to Sam Abed, and my second question would probably be better presented to Mr. Nunez. Mr. Abed, have you ever knowingly or unknowingly hired an undocumented worker to work for you personally, to your knowledge?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Nunez, can you please explain to me how a person from a Latin American country or somewhere else, aside from Mr. Abed's fortunate ability to marry into U.S. citizenship, could you please explain to me how one would be able to attain citizenship at this moment correctly?
Well, the immigration law has essentially 4 different categories of admissibility, the largest of which is family reunification. There's a whole bunch of different categories of people that are entitled to immigrate if you are related to a U.S. citizen and the nature of the relationship matters, if a direct relationship or more distant, or if you're related to an immigrated alien. Of the 1 million people roughly that are admitted every year, 65% are admitted just because they're related to somebody that's already here. The second largest category is employment related. There are a number of categories where people can immigrate, get a green card because they have a specific skill. They fit into a category that's designed, laid out in the law, and that accounts for maybe 35%. And then you have some smaller categories for what's called diversity immigrants, basically drawn out of a hat. and refugees and asylees. So that makes up about 100,000. Once you get a green card under any of those criteria, then you're eligible for permanent legal residence, and in due course you can apply to be a citizen. It's pretty straightforward.
How long does due course take?
I'm sorry?
How long would due course take, in your opinion?
To become a citizen or to immigrate?
My brother, 18 years. It took my brother 18 years.
Well, once you are here as an immigrant, it should take 5 years. I think there's a 5-year waiting period. Once you're here. Now, if your question is to immigrate, there are long backlogs in some family categories. They can go for 10 or 15 years just to get a green card.
I think, just let me add just quickly, you should have 5 years of green card holder.
Right.
And normally the waiting list was 5 years, as Dr. Peter indicated. After the 911, that time delay was over 10 years right now because of the criminal background checks and everything else. Certain countries taking 15 years. So it varies, but that's why the system is broken. We are not allowing the people who should emigrate to the States with qualifications, and we're taking what we get. Right.
The immigration backlogs happen internationally. You would apply overseas, or you could apply in this country for just initial status, an initial visa to come in. Legal status happens one of two ways. You've been granted a visa, you've been invited into this country on status, and then you have 1 year to apply as a legal permanent resident. That's your green card. Right. And then you have a number of requirements to fulfill, one of which is a 5-year waiting period, and you can apply to naturalize to be a U.S. citizen.
Sure.
So there's the immigration process, which is handled by U.S. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the old services part of INS. They split them apart, so they take kind of the fist over a waiting period. But there's two different processes in place there. The immigration waiting period to come into the country is handled overseas by our consulates. That's the responsibility of the Department of State, is to enforce what the INA, what the immigration law is. So that's why the waiting period is 18 years for his brother, who was applying overseas in a certain category, which Congress has set certain quotas on. Right. But once you have that and you're here in the country, it's 1 year and then 5 years.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Thank you.
My question is going to be directed to the three gentlemen, with the exception of Mr. Pulido, and that has to do with secure communities. Mr. Flores, you said that back in the 90s, the police had the choice of, when somebody was arrested, putting them in through the database if they were not born in the U.S., if they were born in a different country. Now we have what is called the secure communities. I'd like you to address that, if you could, and exactly how it is working, if you are aware of in the different municipalities here. And my understanding is that municipalities are struggling, as we all know, with economics. And one of the incentives with the secure communities is that they get quite a bit of money. And we know that all laws are political in nature. And as the country moves forward into more economic crisis, the federal government money incentives bring about amazing contradictory, shall I say, enforcement. On the one hand, we push for secure communities, the whole checkpoints, but yet I think all of us benefit by the undocumented labor force. I strongly believe that San Diego is upheld by the undocumented labor. So if you could address the monies that come with secure communities, because right now my understanding, I happen to be from Imperial County, Calexico. People that are being deported are dumped off in the border in the middle of the night, as opposed to in Tijuana. You know, they do it any time, and my understanding is that there's between 300 to 400 people being deported daily just here in San Diego, and maybe a quarter of that are women and children, if you can address the whole secure communities. Thank you.
Great, long question. Let me go back to one of your first remarks and make a slight correction. What I was referring to was the jail booking process, where a person who is booked into the jail and at that time gave a place of birth other than the United States, that would automatically go to the immigration people. So it wasn't whether the person would, it's not a choice by the person. If the person gives a place of birth of Mexico, even if they've lived here for the last 50 years, that information automatically went to the immigration people. So it wasn't a choice. In terms of secure communities, I think that like most government programs, federal programs that is, they're going to work better in some places and not so well in others. And my experience has pretty much been focused on North San Diego County, so I don't know how exactly it's working in Calexico, but what I can say is that in terms of its application in the city of Escondido, it should be renamed the Divided Communities Program because of the large Latino population in the city and the effects that this program is having in terms of people losing their jobs and there's other aspects to it, but so I'm just going to give you a short answer to your very long and complex question that it works differently depending on where it's applied. Let me also state that it's been well documented that the Secure Community Program, the accuracy that they've demonstrated in a number of studies is at best poor, and we're talking about an inaccurate immigration finding on some of these people in this 30 percentile range. And when we're talking about people's lives, including the lives of American citizens who may well be children of these people that get caught up in the Secure Communities Program, I think that a 30% error rate is unacceptable. And they need to get their act together before a program like that is spread across countrywide.
If I may make a comment in reference to what Professor Flores just said, all of California, all of its jurisdictions are activated into secure communities right now, and 47, I think, % of jurisdictions across the nation are activated. And as of, they're planning by 2013 to have the whole nation activated. So this is definitely spread like wildfire, and it's no longer a choice of the jurisdictions whether or not they want to enter into these MOAs with ICE. Those MOAs have all been taken away, and as of August 5th, the federal government has decided that secure communities will be a mandatory program. So the ability of an opt-out is, well, it's looking grim, although we know that anything's possible. But what I will say is that there are jurisdictions that do things differently, which goes to Bill's point. In Los Angeles County, secure communities functions post-conviction. So in other areas, you get run through the secure communities program at the moment of booking, which means whether or not you're innocent or you were perhaps a mistaken identity, your information will go directly to ICE and will be flagged if there's a database match with ICE's database. In LA County, that happens post-conviction, which does seem to be a different approach in that if you're unauthorized and you've been convicted of a crime, then your information goes to ICE, not at the moment of being booked.
Secure communities, it's an interesting program. However, We are doing pretty much a good part of it. Our coordination with ICE is very clear. I believe this is driven by the federal government, by the Obama administration, and the recent article in the North County Times says that President Obama's administrations have deported more illegal criminals than any other president in the U.S. And I can tell you that we have been nominated, or I think we are getting close to win a national award for our very successful program in Escondido, or the work with the Escondido police and the ICE to get the illegal criminals out of our community. When I got the green card, I was told if I commit a crime, even a minor crime, I would lose my citizenship as a green card holder. So how can we allow these standards for the legal residents and ignore those who haven't even started the immigration process? Personally, I believe that the federal government and the states have failed to do their things. They are trying to legislate from Washington, D.C. or Sacramento. We believe that we know our community the best. We deal with it, and I think we are making a great progress to make our community safe. So I think the public safety is the #1 issue for a local community, and we're exercising this right to do it and to make our community safe. This is about public safety. If you are a citizen committing crime and driving drunk at the checkpoints, you're going to be prosecuted. I don't know if the suggestion is, if you're a legal citizen, we're going to prosecute you, but if you're an illegal citizen, under the family things and everything else, we want to let you go. We need to have some standards that is public safety driven, not immigration driven, and that's what we're doing in Escondido.
Hi, my name is Amy Callahan. I'm an intern here for the Transborder Institute, and so my question specifically is for the mayor, though I would like to hear from everyone who has something to say. You spoke of the importance of education earlier and how you were able to provide higher education for a member of your family who has since returned to Lebanon. So as Dr. Shirk mentioned earlier, I would like to ask you about the California DREAM Act and your thoughts on providing aid for the children of illegal immigrants.
Certainly, I realized the American dream because of my education background. I went to the American University of Beirut and was lucky enough to get great education and work for a good company. In this hard economic times, I think we need to give priorities for legal citizens and legal immigrant. So if I have so much limited, my daughter is going to Cal State San Marcos, and her tuition has increased by 35%. And I think we have limited resources from the states. So I believe that taxpayers' money should be spent on legal citizens, and I am against the DREAM Act.
Anybody want to?
I just want to mention that AB 131 is 1% of the overall Cal Grant program budget of $1.4 billion. So I just want to make that point. Second thing I want to point out is I really appreciated what the governor said, and I think there's something powerful in his quote when he signed the bill. Going to college is a dream that promises intellectual excitement and creative thinking. And if anything needs creative thinking and intellectual excitement, is this question about the border. So, I mean, that's a beautiful statement in terms of the hope with regards to this issue. And I think it's important to underscore that.
Well, the only two problems I have with the DREAM Act are, first of all, it's taxpayer money. So I think it's a legitimate question to ask, how much should the citizens or the taxpayers of the state pay to reward somebody or provide a benefit for somebody that's here illegally? I don't think that's a frivolous question. The second point is the DREAM Act, federal or the California version, is another thing, an incentive, another magnet that will draw people to come to the to continue to come to the United States illegally. If you told me that we were going to somehow or other, through a combination of border enforcement, workplace enforcement, et cetera, end future illegal immigration, then it's much easier to deal with the question of what to do with those that are now here illegally. But the problem is, and we've seen this from 1986 on, we did an amnesty. I mean, it worked in the sense that it provided amnesty for a lot of people, but it just encouraged more legal and illegal immigration. So until we can stop illegal immigration, it makes no sense to ask the taxpayers to provide benefits for people who've broken the law to come here. That's my view.
There's one thing I think that we have to, I would like to address with regard to sort of the burden or the contribution of undocumented immigration in the United States, and that is that I've been on panels where numbers are bounced back and forth a lot. We do know that undocumented peoples contribute enormously to the economy of places like California. I'm not going to go into the numbers, but I think we have to keep in mind when we start this balancing act between what they take and what they give. And I would just want to throw that out there because I think that's an extraordinarily important point to keep in mind. It's how much really is the DREAM Act, and here I'm going to be moderator, but I'm also taking a position, how much does the DREAM Act really cost the state of California? I would just point that out.
It's not the only thing, though. Yeah. It's not the only thing the taxpayers are paying for. The cost of educating a child K through 12 is what, $10,000 to $12,000 a year?
But also what, how the numbers, how much undocumented immigrants contribute in terms of taxes and in terms of the contributions to Social Security and all of these government programs.
Every study that I've seen shows that if you're talking about a family of illegal immigrants, the cost far outweighs the benefit.
Can you speak into the mic? We can't hear you.
I don't know if it's turned on.
He needs the mic turned on.
So we're having an audio problem right now with his mic.
I think
Next question.
I do agree that most of the studies we have seen in the U.S. that there is a net cost to the taxpayers, including you have to count the benefits they provide and the tax they provide in this country, and there are benefits. There are certain jobs in the agriculture and landscaping that American citizens cannot do. That's for sure. So I think the net study I have seen is a net cost to the taxpayers.
I just want to make a quick point because I think this is, this can go back and forth all afternoon. But I guess the second question is whether or not it's a cost or a benefit, what the cost would be to society if we did not educate children K through 12, college. What would our society look like? Would we see even greater economic and social inequalities in the United States? I think that kind of gets at the brunt of the question.
Good point.
I'd like to ask Mr. Nunez a question. I mean, do you really think that in the decision-making process to immigrate to the United States, the immigrants say, well, let's see, California has a DREAM Act. I think we'll go there. I think it's pretty much job-driven. I think most studies show that. And I think, and I hope, believing in the rule of law, that this law is going to reap long-term benefits for this state and this country.
Hi, my name is Sophia Carrillo. I'm an intern here at the Transborder Institute, and I have a question for all of the panelists. It's kind of a looking forward type of question. So, Amy talked a little bit about the California DREAM Act. When Jerry Brown signed the California DREAM Act, he gave friends of mine who had similar academic backgrounds as me, they were the top 5%, 1% of their high schools, a chance to actually contribute to California, contribute to the United States. Like me, a few of my friends, the United States is the only home they've ever known. It's the only culture they subscribe to. Their loyalty to the U.S. is undeniable, and the American dream is theirs. But what I saw with the California DREAM Act is it was a step toward immigration reform that actually addresses the nuances of multi-status communities. Now, I'm from Imperial County, and I've seen classmates of mine who were deported. Some of them were U.S. citizens who went with their families. And a lot of the hope behind the California DREAM Act, speaking as someone who advocated heavily for it, was that it was a step towards reform. What do you think, now that California DREAM Act is law, are the next steps? I know that Professor Nunez touched on this, but for each panelist, what are the next steps looking towards a brighter future?
I can start. That's a good question. I think, my comments, I said looking forward and get us together under the rule of law is very important. Absolutely. Just to give you an example, we have a company called EDI in Escondido. They have been audited by ICE, and they found 50 employees that they are not eligible to work. And with the E-Verify, you cannot go backwards, but you can apply it to new employees. In 2 days, they have filled the 50 positions with legal immigrants. And I think this is the fairness issue here that I would like to see, to give priorities for the people who worked hard and came to this country illegally. If we have money for everybody, I believe in education, but we don't. Our state is facing $25 billion deficit, and now you have good news from the Governor Brown. It's only $13 billion. We are spending more than we are making, and I think that's going to affect our schools. Our universities are getting less money, and our tuition is going higher and higher. Right now, it's a matter of priorities. And if you ask me where the priorities should be to the legal immigrants and the citizens first. And if you have more resources and more money, if I want to spend money on illegal immigration, I think education would be the top priority.
I'll take up next. I think the mayor is correct in that the DREAM Act in California was passed in a tough economic climate, and perhaps that's unfortunate. If it was passed, in the boom times of the early 2000s, the discussion would probably look a lot different. I'm a supporter of the California DREAM Act, both bills that were passed by the Assembly and signed by the governor. But I think in looking forward, unfortunately, the DREAM Act is not the ultimate step for students who qualify for it, because even though they can now get college education in a much facilitated way, that doesn't open the door to work post-college. So while we have a more educated populace, we still have young people who will not be able to qualify to get those kinds of jobs that they've trained for in college. And I think that's a big problem. And I can understand why a lot of students would be discouraged about even going to college, even in a state like California that affords them a lot of opportunities to do so, because the door is still closed once they finish those 4 years of education.
Famous 9 digits. And I think that's what it comes down to. I think you've posed the question well in talking about the complexities that I was trying to speak to in terms of living here and daily struggling with these kind of issues. I've worked with a lot of high schools in San Diego where the majority of students are undocumented. I've worked with students who are undocumented, and we continue to challenge, this continues to be the challenging issue. So how do we then translate that into jobs and the hope for students? What do we do with students, for example, at San Diego High School who are undocumented? What future do they have? What hope do they have? They're here. So if it's rule of law and it's deportation, then maybe that's one perspective, but maybe there's other ways of looking at that in terms of working with those communities. And I think, as the mayor said, to work together in a way that's, again, creative and a way that is humane and speaks to it. He said, the mayor said that I guess you said you didn't believe in civil rights, or civil rights was a privilege?
Yeah, I think we should provide human rights for everybody.
But civil rights is
civil rights,
separate.
You have to be a citizen.
I guess I would say that civil rights are for everybody. I guess I would disagree with that. I think civil rights are important, and I think they come along with human rights. I don't know how those could be separated, but I guess maybe under law they can, but I'm speaking about it in terms of people.
I think another important aspect not to overlook is the fact that we're entering into another election season. And as the Republicans kind of go through their process in coming up with a nominee, I think we're going to be hearing some talk about the immigration issue, which will have a direct impact on, which might have a direct impact, depending on the outcome of the election, on what direction it's going to take, including the state of California.
If we could ask the questions, because we're sort of running out of time, and then we can answer them instead of one-on-one. So if I could have all the people come up here and ask their questions, and then we will have a round of answers, because we're running out of time.
Well, thank you very much. And one thing that really strikes me, and I've seen Angela present a couple of times now, is that what's very clear is that when you run the data and the data analysis, the facts, we have to let the facts speak, right? And I think that it's important to tell the whole story. So I think there's a couple of things I want to ask the panelists, and particularly I think also Dr. Pulido to reflect on is number one, we've talked about population growth as a need to necessarily close borders, but we also haven't talked about the impact of free trade agreements that have decimated economies. When we talk about immigration, it isn't just about the United States, it's about everybody. I think secondly, in terms of secure communities, et cetera, when you look at the data from the Police Executive Forum regarding 287G, I think which Angela cited in her presentation, you found that one of the most problematic things for reasons why police agencies weren't joining, and I believe this is, there was a survey of 135 different agencies, was the main reason they didn't want to join was because, not necessarily just rule of law, but interpretation of the law, namely probable cause doctrine. Meaning, at the ground level, how do you decide who's illegal and who do you pull over and how do you enforce? So I think just to reflect on, if we're going to talk about facts and figures and telling the story of immigration and enforcement, how do we also draw a more holistic picture based on the facts that are out there?
Thank you.
My question is for anybody who wants to answer, but how do you create an immigration policy that is both civilly just per se and effective at the same time? And is it possible in a post 9/11 era where the emphasis is on keeping our borders quote unquote secure?
Thank you.
My question is for Mayor Abed. I'm wondering if the city itself or the police department has made any effort to look at the effect of Escondido's policies on police and community relations. For example, have there been a drop in calls for service or rises in crime in immigrant neighborhoods? And just wondering if you guys have taken an empirical look at that, or other people if they've seen that in other areas.
I'm going to ask a second question. So my question this time, Dr. Shirk asked earlier a question revolving around the idea of who is considered a criminal in the way that the Obama administration is prioritizing its deportation efforts. So my question is more about the way that people, the way how people are deported. I know I've read about a government program that's been in place for a few years that essentially will take an immigrant who crosses illegally in Ciudad Juarez, for example, and then when they are deported, they're deported back to Tijuana, where they maybe don't have any family, any contacts, know anything about the city. I also know that gangs and drug cartels are, often they prey on migrants and, are in these border areas. And so my question is just kind of in general, anyone's thoughts on this program, how it works, and any changes that maybe should be made to it.
Comment and then a broad question, if I may. I'm from New Jersey, and I look at all these Latino names in front of me, and I think of the fact that when New Jersey became a state, California was part of Mexico. And then an American army went into Mexico, and suddenly California became part of the United States. I just want to emphasize a little bit of history. In New Jersey, I could fly an Irish flag above my home, and usually did, certainly for all the holidays. And that did not offend the United States of those days. Today, we're dealing with the cost of war in the United States, and we've been very parochial in talking about our neighborhood with not too much history, and it's all in the present. My neighborhood, I witnessed 3 events of arresting people or pulling people in, one being deported for riding a bike without a light on his bike, and he was pressured into voluntary departure, leaving his American-born child and his indigenous wife from Guatemala there. 3 weeks later, this is North County, by the way, but not in your city, Mayor. Second case was 2 guys who were obviously Latino, but well-dressed with good sneakers on, 2 blocks from my home, who were stopped by cops who called ICE in, and I happened to be walking my dog and came up to the event and queried the officers as to what was going on. I was told to get across the street to get out of their interrogation of the suspect. So I crossed the street. Then they called in ICE, and ICE got into it, and I came back and tried to ask the ICE officers what was going on. The only statement they would make was these guys had sneakers that were much too good to be Mexicans walking around here, and they were probably gang members from LA. Now, I'm an American, and I'm proud of it, but I've spent more of my life out of the country than I have in. And I just say, where is our sense of history? Where is our sense of future? Where is our sense, and with this I agree with the mayor. But I'll confess to you, sir, that I did not buy a car in Escondido 4 years ago because I was joining people in protest at the attitudes of people in Escondido, and I bought it in another town.
Yeah, we appreciate the question. Yeah, let me address the questions. Free trade agreement, it's mostly a Republican issue. I disagree with it. I think it's affecting our local economy and the jobs here. And I think because of the trade deficit we have with a lot of countries, we are losing the jobs here. And I think the free trade agreement has affected the agricultural industry in North County and Escondido in particular because of the imported goods from other countries. How did the immigration and the public safety policy have affected our city? It's been well received. It has been reflected in the last election. The last elections, the three council members and the mayors, the two council members and the mayors who were elected were the three that enacted the ordinance of the rental ban. Those who initiated the public safety issues, those council members who feel that the immigration issue should be addressed, but we need to address the crime issues. So it's not what Sam wants, it's not what Mary Waldron wants, it's the people, it's the will of the people who elected council members based on certain policy. And I agree with you, we should not, racial profiling is an important thing, and I understand Bill Flores' concerns. It could become a problem. I am committed as mayor to avoid racial profiling. The information I have from our police is we do not deport anybody that is riding a bike without a light. That doesn't happen in Escondido. And if you're aware of something like this, let us know. We deport people who committed crime, and the criteria is DUI and above. So let me make this clear. Secondly, let me finish, Bill. I need to finish here, and you can comment on it. Community important. Okay, the police effort has since we implemented these policies, we had 35.8% decrease in traffic injuries. We have 42.8% decrease in alcohol-related injuries. We have hit and run down 33%. Hit and run collisions is down almost 35%. Total traffic collision 32%. DUI accidents 24%, and red light violations 58%. It is well received in the community, and I think when the overwhelming majority of the citizens need us to deal with the immigration on the local level, that is well received by the people who voted us in things. That's your choice to buy the car wherever you want, but I'm sure there is a lot more people that came to Escondido and do business because we are addressing the public safety, and I think it's if the people disagree with our policies, there is always an election. But I'm very proud of our record, and I think we're making our city greater. Our priority moving forward should be about creating jobs opportunity, creating the economy, and I think this is what we need to do, and we're doing this in Escondido. We're shifting our focus now to create opportunities for the people in Escondido to get jobs, to get a better life, to educate their families and get a better life. This is the American dream, but we cannot just ignore the problems and let it go. It's politically correct. We need to make sure that we have a policy that is not racially driven, because I think this is not fair to stop people based on their skin color. We are very aware of it. We are very sensitive of it, and I think we are addressing this. The chief is addressing those issues, and we're not perfect. But if something happens, we need to address it. I met with the Consul General of Mexico. She gave me several examples of racial profiling, and it turned out to be untrue. So we have established a good relationship with the Consul General, saying we need to get the criminal aspect of our public safety, but we need to help those who are here trying to get a living and trying to get a better life for themselves. It's a fine line, but I think we are aware of it, and I will be the first one to tell you that I am a minority, and I don't want any minority groups to be discriminated against.
You want to?
Yeah, a couple of comments. Number one, the city of Escondido doesn't deport anybody. Point number two, what they do is turn them over to ICE, and that relationship is what's causing the divisiveness in the city. Number two, all the data that the mayor related, I think it's important to note that cities across the state of California have all experienced decreases in traffic accident hit and runs just about across the board. And the reason, well, first of all, there's no study that shows a cause and effect between checkpoints and a reduction in traffic accidents or hit and run accidents, because it's just not there. What the most plausible explanation is because of the downturn in the economy, where people are actually driving less because they lost their job or they don't have the money to buy the gas to start going. That's the most plausible explanation in terms of the decrease of traffic accidents and hit and runs, which is, again, criminal conduct that occurs after a traffic accident. And more to your point, I think, sir, is this. I think you may or may not be aware that the San Diego Padres are thinking about moving their AAA baseball team into the city. If the city assists the team in building a stadium and that kind of thing. And I'll just repeat what I have said in the past, and I know the mayor has heard me say this again, that even if they build it, they will not come. Latinos will not come. It's not going to happen. And that's a big marketing or segment of the market that the Padres want to reach. I mean, do you really think Latinos from across the region are going to come into a city where they might enjoy a baseball game, but there's going to be ICE agents walking around the stadium, and as soon as they leave, there's going to be a DUI checkpoint right outside? I mean, really?
Unbelievable.
Do you really think?
Stretching the truth is just unbelievable emotional approach, Bill. I disagree. Wow.
That comes as a surprise.
We had a number of other questions out there. Would the panel like to answer?
I wanted to mention, so I can go work backwards if I can remember the last question. I think you're absolutely right. This is a very transformative part of the world. Yes, this once was Mexico. Before it was Mexico, it was once Spain, New Spain. And then before that, it had indigenous connections. And so that hasn't changed. But this continual transformation of the region, I think, is very important to keep mind of. Post-1850, of course, this becomes of the United States. But the sense of the territory, the sense of the people remains. And I think that's what I was trying to address with regards to these quote-unquote border communities. And I think if you went to other parts of the world, it could be compared, but I think it's very different. I think it's very unique. So I just want to underscore your point, and I think it's very important. That sense of history is not that the immigration question was just dropped down a week ago. Nobody touched about the correlation between the need for labor in this country and the flow of immigrants. Nobody touched on the fact that when there is a loss of economics, the deportation of people. And right now, it's not an accident that we have such harsh immigration policies with such a poor economy. And I think it was an important thing to look at. So it's important to address that. I think you asked a question about securing the border. I think this is part of the dilemma we're facing here. How are we going to define that? One side is going to say we're going to do it with some very harsh ways and rule of law. Others are going to want to be a little bit more sensitive and wanting to be more different in terms of maybe the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. And I think we get to that. But let's not forget that this law enforcement and this securing of the border is an economic venture for this country. All the prison systems that have now gone privatized, and the role of immigrants in that process is very, very important, and it continues to grow. It's probably one of the most profiting business ventures in this nation. And so that's going to continue, and how are you going to stop that? So are we going to suddenly just stop all those employees, stop all these? It's going to continue to fester because it's important to address that aspect. Professor Lum, I'm not really sure I followed the question. I guess one of the things that, in terms of what I wish we would have more conversation of is city conversations between Tijuana and San Diego. And I think one of the things that divide us, for example, like at this campus, is there's class distinctions. We have people from Mexico who are engaged in these questions that might be from a different class level, and people here who are poor and are struggling. And one of the things to begin to look at that question, I think, would be conversations that we could begin to challenge that, or at least look at it from different points of views and wanting to work with that. I've worked many years with the Casa Migrante, so many of you in here know about the role of the Casa Migrante, and what kind of work could we do with the Casa in a very effective way, crossing borders, and bringing, for example, legal services and addressing even the issues that we may not agree with, because people are facing these issues daily, like people being arrested for not having a light, et cetera, et cetera. If you go to the Casa and you spend one evening, you'll hear story after story of people who have been deported. And the Casa now has become a site of deportation. It's no longer a welcoming site for people who are coming into Mexico. So that's a reality that we have to live with. So those are my thoughts.
Three things. Number one, I've got some handouts here, a few, probably not enough for everybody, but if anybody wants some documents on the state local authority to enforce immigration laws, I've got that here. You're welcome to take it. Number two, one small point. I don't remember who asked it, but there is a difference between 287G and secure communities. I mean, 287G is a program that actually envisions state and local law enforcement being on the street doing some sort of immigration enforcement, whereas secure communities is really the new program that Bill talked about, where the databases, when people are booked in a prison or a jail rather, that their records are bounced off of an immigration database. So they're two different things. The main point I wanted to make was how do you develop a humane or effective immigration policy? Someone asked that, I think. Yes, no? Yeah. Yeah. Here's my answer. There's four things that when any nation sets about to establish an immigration policy, it seems to me there's four questions you have to ask. First, why? What is the purpose you are trying to achieve? Do you want large numbers of immigrants, small numbers? Do you want certain kinds of immigrants, skilled workers versus non-skilled? Do you want to focus on humanitarian need? What is the national interest of the country that is, in this case, the United States? What is in our national interest? What are we trying to achieve? All of our public policies should be responsive to something that's in our national interest. So we have to identify what our goal is. That's the first thing. Secondly, once you establish that, you have to determine who fits that criteria. Are you looking for skilled workers? Are you looking for farm workers? Are you looking for family reunification? Are you looking to assist refugees and humanitarian goals? Do we have a shortage of a particular kind of worker in the United States? I mean, we've been importing nurses from the Philippines now for years. You're trying to tell me that the United States can't produce enough nurses to satisfy our domestic needs? I mean, this is silly. I mean, why doesn't University of this drives me crazy. We are importing nurses instead of training. Is this a job Americans won't do? I mean, excuse me, this is crazy. So, who do we want to admit that fits the national, that satisfies or addresses the national interest? Third question, how many? Do we need farm workers? If so, do we need 100, 1,000, 1 million? How many do we need? We've got 11 million people here illegally now, plus 1 million legal immigrants coming in every year, most of whom don't come to satisfy anything except family reunification. But how many of whatever the category is do you need? And then finally, what's the impact on society, on the country, of the decisions you've made and the way you're going to implement your policy. Now, out of the 100 senators and 435 congressmen and the people in the administration, I'll bet you there isn't a single one who's ever thought about immigration policy in a disciplined way. They just respond, as I think we all recognize, to whatever the political whim is that drives their reelection goals. So.
I want to thank you. I want to thank the University of San Diego for doing this forum. I think it is important to have a diverse and honest discussion about this immigration, and I appreciate my colleagues here on the panel to have this discussion. We need to continue to have this honest discussion based on facts and based on moving forward, not based on emotion, and I think we have achieved that today. I enjoyed the being a part of the panel, and I thank you for being here, and thank you for your questions.
Angela, would you like to?
I think we can leave it at that. Thank you
All
for
right.
the opportunity. But
Bill, do you have anything?
So much. All right. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would just like to, I want to do this as part of my ritual. I want to thank all of our assistants, Amy, Lorena, Sofia, Gladys, who have I left out? That's it. Thank you very much for coming.